That winter, Xiantong was 9 years old, and what we feared the most finally happened. Take the child and leave. Leave tonight. I'll take you across the Sana River. Once you cross, head north. As long as you get out of the border, you'll be safe.
No.
We agreed to live and die together. We can't leave you behind. If you stay, we'll all die. His bloodshot eyes gleamed as he tore the bowstring apart in a fit of rage. The suppressed fury surged into his knuckles, and the taut string sliced into his fingers, leaving them bleeding profusely. Panicked, I fumbled to stop the bleeding, but the more frantic I was, the harder it was to find the medicine. In desperation, I tore a strip of fabric from my headscarf, grabbed a bottle of sesame oil from the kitchen, sucked out the blood, and dabbed the oil onto the wound before wrapping it tightly. He pulled me into his arms, stroking my disheveled hair as his voice choked with emotion.
Go, please.
You and the child have to live. You must live well. I turned away, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. My trembling hands tied the final knot before my emotions crumbled completely. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing in quiet agony. He held me tightly, his large hand pressing my head as though it might embed into my skull. After a long time, I felt the warmth of tears on my neck. I knew then that he was crying. He said, "I can't bear to leave Xiantong, or you, or this hard-earned home. But come with us," I pleaded. "Cross the border with us." "I can't. I won't drag you down anymore." He released me, stood, and walked toward the door. Outside, the howling wind carried an endless darkness. I thought I could hear the footsteps of those chasing us, their blades ringing with murderous intent. A shiver ran through me, and I trembled uncontrollably. I didn't dare to lift my head. The fear filled me, like the wind that poured into every corner of my lungs. In the hearth, the blackened coals dimmed into an unsteady glow of grayish-red flames, flickering faintly. This time, it might truly be a farewell in death. My throat tightened as I struggled to stand. Through the window, I saw him untying the bull's rope. This time it was real. We had no more places to hide, no way left to run. After all, 7 years ago, those lives, one after another, though dead and beyond testimony, still left cracks for others to follow. Xiantong had become the final piece of evidence. His name was Yang Liang. His father had been a steel mill worker. When Yang was 16, his father jumped into the fiery smelting furnace, dissolving into molten iron. Rumors spread through the town. Some said his father couldn't bear the torment of family life and chose suicide. Others claimed he had stumbled upon a dangerous secret during a night shift and was silenced. No one knew for sure. Stories about Yang's father's death multiplied, but like his body, they were swallowed by time, fading into obscurity. After his father's death, Yang Liang dropped out of school. His mother caused several disturbances at the factory, demanding compensation. Eventually, the factory agreed to let Yang Liang take his father's position in the scrap metal yard. But Yang refused. Instead, he bought a second-hand tricycle and began collecting scrap metal. In the steel mill district, scrap collecting was the lowest of low professions, especially door-to-door collecting. Yang Liang was one of those collectors. His mother despised his work, berating him constantly. "Idiot. Useless trash. A cowardly rat digging through the garbage." These insults were nothing new. His mother had always scolded his father like this. After his father's death, her endless criticisms were transferred onto Yang Liang. At times, overwhelmed by her verbal abuse, Yang even began to believe the rumors that his father had chosen death to escape her endless tirades. But deep down, he knew otherwise. His father hadn't committed suicide. Yang Liang vividly remembered the night before his father's death. His father had said to him, "Liang, you'll see. Your useless dad might finally get lucky. Our family's fortune might turn around." That evening, his father had even bought 2 ounces of pork head meat, treating himself to several glasses of cheap liquor. Despite his mother's constant nagging. Wasteful. Squandering money again, buying meat like a big shot. "Do you think you're rich?" His father seemed uncharacteristically upbeat, his face flushed with hope. Before heading to his night shift, his father had even checked on Yang Liang in his room. Yang had pretended to be asleep, unwilling to face him. He even felt disdain for his father's weakness. Always the scapegoat at home and at work. He hadn't realized that it would be their last meeting. Through half-open eyes, he had watched his father's frail figure in his work uniform as he left. Who could have known that would be their final goodbye? Yang Liang never saw even a single strand of his father's hair again. His father had melted into molten steel, taking with him the rumors and the truth, leaving behind an unsolved mystery. After his father's death, Yang began to understand him a little more. Faced with his mother's relentless scorn, he couldn't find the words to argue back. There was no starting point for debate. His mother was forever fixated on her narrow, bitter truths, leaving Yang with nothing but silence. In his most desperate moments, Yang never smashed or shouted as his father once did. To him, such acts were signs of weakness. Instead, he would fill a bucket with cold water and douse himself from head to toe. Even in the depths of winter, with snowflakes falling outside and icy water freezing him to the bone, he would endure. Yet the echo of his mother's cutting words, like a swarm of ants, gnawed at him incessantly, pushing him toward collapse. When Yang felt he could bear no more, he met someone, Lu Xiaofang, a prostitute. She offered him temporary solace, but also dragged him into an abyss he couldn't escape. Lu Xiaofang's salon was located at the west gate of the steel factory and was called Fragrant Salon. That day, Yang Liang was once again soaked to the bone. Snowflakes swirled in the biting north wind as he pedaled his tricycle aimlessly, wanting to get as far away from home as possible. But he didn't get far before collapsing in the snow, unconscious. When he woke up, he found himself in a cramped little room. It was warm inside, and he was stark naked. A woman was smiling at him, her eyes twinkling. Startled, he jumped up, only to sit back down awkwardly. The woman chuckled, her laughter crisp and clear. "Little guy, don't flatter yourself. Sister's seen all kinds of men. You nearly froze to death out there." It was Lu Xiaofang who had saved Yang Liang. She had stripped him down and given him an ice-cold bath, treating poison with poison. When he woke up, Lu Xiaofang handed him a bowl of hot ginger tea. He gulped it down in one go. The warmth spread through his stomach and down to his limbs, igniting a sense of vitality. That night, there were no customers at the salon, and Yang Liang slept soundly until morning. From that day on, Yang Liang liked going to Lu Xiaofang's salon. He wasn't sure if it was the warmth of that ginger tea or Lu Xiaofang's gentle nature that pulled him in, but he couldn't resist the urge to step inside. To him, after a hard day pedaling his tricycle, having a cozy place to rest for a while was his only luxury. Lu Xiaofang made a living off men, and Yang Liang was just a young lad. She couldn't possibly let him stay, but she didn't have the heart to drive him away either. He would sit quietly while she worked, cutting hair for customers. When a client requested a private room, Lu Xiaofang wouldn't hide it. She'd head in to serve them, and Yang Liang would sit outside with his eyes closed, leaving only after the sky had turned completely dark. By the time his tricycle rolled into the courtyard at home, a torrent of scolding was already waiting for him. Yang Liang, as usual, kept silent. Time slipped by like flowing water. As the ambiguous relationship between Yang Liang and Lu Xiaofang continued, rumors spread like wildfire across every corner of the steel factory. One day, Yang Liang's mother came knocking. She trashed Lu Xiaofang's salon, smashing everything to bits, and even yanked a handful of Lu Xiaofang's hair. But Lu Xiaofang, a seasoned woman who had been in the business for years, wasn't one to take things lying down. She hired a few local thugs, planning to teach Yang Liang's mother a lesson. Just as the thugs were about to act, Yang Liang arrived, begging, "Sister Lu, please let her go this time. Count this as a favor to me. I'll be at your service for life. Whatever you need, I'll do it, even if it means going to hell and back." Lu Xiaofeng exhaled a puff of smoke and pondered for a moment before putting out her cigarette with a scoff. Liang, that's easy for you to say. At my service for life? How, exactly? Whatever you say, Sister Lu. However you want me to serve you, I will, he promised earnestly. Lu Xiaofeng burst into laughter. Didn't expect you to be such a filial son. But aren't people saying you and that old lady don't get along? She's the one who cursed your dad to death, isn't she? Don't you dare talk about him like that. Yang Liang snapped, clearly upset. Oh, look at you, getting all worked up. All right then, for the sake of your filial piety, I'll let it go this time. But remember, you owe me this one, and you'll have to repay it, Lu Xiaofeng said, her tone full of certainty. But Yang Liang didn't pick up on her undertone. Life went back to its routine. Yang Liang continued his early mornings and late nights, occasionally stopping by the salon to sit, smoke a cigarette, and listen to Lu Xiaofeng vent about her troubles. As summer approached, the steel factory allocated a new batch of housing, and several families were moving in. Yang Liang was busy helping with moving jobs and clearing out trash. To earn more money, he hadn't visited the salon in a long time. On the day Lu Xiaofeng had her accident, Yang Liang was working at one of the new housing units. By the time he arrived at her salon, her body had already been reduced to a charred, curled-up form, like a blackened shrimp. It was said that the fire was caused by faulty wiring. Not long after Lu Xiaofeng's death, an old rural woman showed up, carrying a baby less than a year old and a letter in her hands. Tears streamed down the old woman's face as she said, "You must be Yang Liang. Lu Xiaofeng was my daughter. She brought shame to our family with the life she chose. Now she's gone, leaving behind this child. I can't afford to raise her." In her letter, she mentioned finding a tricycle driver who scavenged for a living, a man named Yang Liang. Yang Liang was at a loss. He knew he owed Lu Xiaofeng a debt of gratitude, but raising a child? That was beyond him. After a long pause, he said, "Auntie, how about this? I'll send you money every month to support the child. Would that work?" "No," the old woman said firmly. "My son's about to get married. I was already planning to send the child to her mother, but now that she's dead, it's your responsibility. Keep her if you want, or don't. It's up to you. She's probably just some customer's bastard child anyway." With that, she shoved the baby into Yang Liang's arms and walked away without looking back. Yang Liang stood there holding the soft, squirming baby, glancing around helplessly before finally bringing her home. His mother, as expected, wouldn't have it. "You messed around with a prostitute, and now that she's dead, you bring her bastard child home? Get rid of her right now, or you're not stepping foot in this house," she demanded. If it had been before, Yang Liang wouldn't have taken this lying down. But now, with the child in his arms, he had no choice. He pleaded, "Mom, look, it's still a life. You wouldn't just throw away a stray kitten or puppy, would you? You're not even married yet. What are you going to do with her? What about your future?" she retorted. "I don't have time to think about that now. Do you think I want this? But if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't owe such a huge debt to Sister Lu. If I hadn't begged her back then, you'd probably be in a wheelchair now, thanks to those thugs she hired." "You dare talk back to me? It's all because of you," his mother yelled, hurling a broom at him. The baby burst into tears, wailing loudly. That evening, left with no other option, Yang Liang came to me, asking if I could spare some milk for the baby. The first time I met Yang Liang was many years ago, at a landfill on the outskirts of town. He was being cornered and beaten by a group of thugs. His tricycle was knocked over and bent out of shape. His face was bruised and swollen, but he neither fought back nor made a sound. When the thugs had had their fill, they swaggered away. At that time, I was living the most radiant days of my life. My father was the head of the steel mill sales department, controlling the lifeblood of the steel trade. That day, a month after my engagement, my fiancé and I were taking a stroll on the outskirts. His father was the head of the mill's procurement department, making us a perfectly matched couple. Out of sympathy, I offered Yang Liang a handkerchief, but he didn't accept it, simply propping up his battered tricycle and leaving. My fiancé sneered. Why bother with someone like that? Don't you know? His dad was that stubborn old fool who jumped into the steel furnace to kill himself. Just another blockhead. At that moment, I had no idea I was about to end up just like him. My father was taken away for embezzlement, and overnight, our family's fortunes plummeted. First, my engagement was called off. Then, our house was confiscated, and my mother and I were left homeless. With nowhere else to go, we stayed at my grandmother's. But the relatives who had once benefited from my father's influence now treated us coldly. My mother, unable to bear the disgrace, drowned herself in the river 3 days after my father's sentencing. I was transferred from the materials department to the steel mill's cafeteria, where I was given all the dirtiest and hardest jobs. When I was at my lowest, the chef, Zhang Yu, took a liking to me and pursued me relentlessly. At first, I looked down on him, but being in such dire straits, having someone show me care and concern was too much to resist. In the end, I said yes. Our wedding was hasty and modest. On the day of the ceremony, I saw Yang Liang again. He had come to collect recyclables. The hall was a mess, and he worked silently amidst the chaos, enduring constant scolding from Zhang Yu's mother. When it came time to pay, a few coins were docked from his fee. He didn't argue, just muttered and left. Watching his thin figure disappear from the window, I felt as though something unspeakable was hidden in his silhouette. That night, I cried for hours. It was my wedding night. Zhang Yu had drunk too much at the reception, and his mother asked me to make him a hangover soup. I added too much dried tangerine peel, making it bitter and sour. Zhang Yu refused to drink it, snoring away instead. His mother scolded me. I knew you were just for show. I told him not to marry you. Returned goods from someone else, with a father in jail. Can't even make a decent soup. I retorted, say what you want about me, but leave my father out of it. He has nothing to do with you. How could he not? Look at us now, saddled with the reputation of being in-laws to a convict. I said nothing more and returned to my room. As Zhang Yu snored away, I looked at him and thought of my ruined life. I couldn't stop the tears from falling. The next day, I told Zhang Yu what had happened, hoping he'd stand up for me. Instead, he coldly said, "Wasn't my mom telling the truth? Stop being so dramatic. You should be grateful you got into this family at all." Then he lunged at me. I pushed him away and left the house. Our Cold War lasted for a few hours. Later in the cafeteria, Zhang Yu apologized, and I didn't want to prolong the argument, so I let it go. But life didn't get easier. My mother-in-law made things hard for me at every turn. My husband either pretended not to notice or said, "You need to adapt to my mom. She's my mother after all." During the hardest times, I thought about divorce. The thought came and went repeatedly. Eventually, I became pregnant. The first 3 months were a nightmare of nausea, but at least they were happy to have a grandchild on the way. For a while, life got a bit easier. Shortly after the baby was born, I was laid off. Both Zhang Yu and I were among the first wave of layoffs. Our family relied on our salaries to get by. Left with no other choice, I started a street food stall with Zhang Yu shortly after my confinement. We worked from dawn until late at night, leaving the baby with my mother-in-law. It was during this time that I truly got to know Yang Liang. Every few days, he would come to collect recyclables from the stall. Over time, we became familiar with each other. I thought that if we worked hard enough, things would get better. But when the baby was 6 months old, disaster struck. One day, my mother-in-law left the baby unattended to play mahjong. The baby rolled off the bed and landed headfirst on the floor. Hours passed before anyone noticed, and by then, it was too late. It was as if fate had planned it. 6 days after my child's death, Yang Liang showed up with a baby of his own, 10 months old. At the time, my breasts were painfully engorged from milk that had nowhere to go. The loss of my child felt like a gaping hole in my heart. When that baby was placed in my arms, my heart shattered. I wanted nothing more than to keep him. By chance, if he had come just a few days later, my milk would have dried up. "What's his name?" I asked as I handed the baby back to Yang Liang. He glanced at the baby, who was full and satisfied, and said, "Xian Tong." I gently stroked the baby's soft cheek and said, "Bring him over earlier tomorrow." Yang Liang nodded. At that moment, neither of us knew that our fates would become inextricably entwined with this child. The third time Yang Liang came over, my mother-in-law was there too. She had no sense of guilt whatsoever. Brazenly, she said to Yang Liang, "You, a junk collector, really know how to find free benefits. Do you think our Zhang family is your permanent meal ticket? Coming here every day with this bastard child to mooch milk." Hearing her nasty words, Yang Liang hugged the baby and tried to leave. I quickly took the baby from him and said, "It's my milk, and I decide what to do with it. I should thank you and this child. If it weren't for you both, I might not even be alive now." She sneered. "Not alive? What's that supposed to mean? You're feeding someone else's kid. When will our Zhang family have another child? Don't forget, your father is still in jail." I shot back. "Listen here. When the baby died, I didn't hold you accountable because I still consider myself your son's wife. But if you keep doing evil, don't blame me for what comes next." She retorted, "And what are you going to do about it?" Then she tried to snatch the baby from me to throw back at Yang Liang. I turned my body sharply and glared at her. She seemed startled, stepping back as she muttered, "Fine, you can feed the baby, but he has to pay every day." Later, Yang Liang told me, "That look in your eyes that day, it was full of murderous intent. It sent chills down my spine." He wasn't wrong. Since my baby died, my mother-in-law and husband showed no remorse, pressuring me endlessly to conceive another child. Many nights, I found myself fantasizing about killing them both. After my mother-in-law left that day, Zhang Yu said, "My mom's just looking out for us. Did you have to go that far? As for the baby, let's do as my mom said, charge for the milk." To avoid further conflict, I complied with their demands, but Zhang Yu disgusted me more each day. Our arguments weren't just fueled by his mother's provocations. He also insisted on sleeping with me every night, trying to get me pregnant again. I knew if I got pregnant, I'd lose my milk entirely. Xiaotong wasn't even a year old. At the very least, I needed to nurse him until he was 15 months old, when he could start eating solid food. To be honest, Yang Liang might not have been able to afford formula, but he'd find a way to feed the child. The baby wouldn't starve. But for me, I couldn't let go of Xiaodong. Whenever he nursed in my arms, I felt like my baby was still alive. When he'd finish eating and smile at me, I believed he was still with me. So when Zhang Yu repeatedly forced himself on me, I racked my brain every night for ways to reject him. Just as I was reaching my breaking point, Zhang Yu got himself into trouble. Under his mother's instigation, he added a banned spice powder to the late-night soup at our food stall. When it was discovered, our stall was shut down and he was arrested. After her son went to jail, my mother-in-law's arrogance diminished. She stopped making things difficult for me. With the food stall gone, I had to take up odd jobs here and there. When Xiaodong was a year and a half old, I weaned him. Though he no longer nursed, Yang Liang knew I missed the child. Every couple of days, he'd bring him over, so we could spend time together. As winter approached, Xiaodong was nearly 2. Yang Liang would strap him to his back and go around collecting scrap every day. But for a few days in a row, they didn't come by. Missing the child terribly, I decided to check on them after work. When I reached the alley, I knew something was wrong. Yang Liang's tricycle was blocked by 7 or 8 thugs. I rushed over, and Yang Liang was emanating an aura of menace. Those thugs were infamous at the steel factory. Local bullies no one dared to provoke. Back when I ran the food stall, I had to pay them protection money. Even then, they'd grope me occasionally. Zhang Yu hated it, but didn't dare stand up to them. Once, their leader put his hand inside my blouse. I lost my temper and splashed him with iced tea. He just laughed and walked away, but Zhang Yu groveled to him and later berated me for my actions. Remembering those years of humiliation felt like needles piercing my heart. They say widows attract trouble, but even before I became one, trouble was endless. After Zhang Yu went to jail, the thugs would harass me whenever they had the chance. I'd usually avoid them, but today I couldn't escape. I approached Yang Liang and asked what was going on. He unstrapped Xiaotong from his back, handed him to me and said, "Sister, take the child and leave." I hesitated and asked, "Why are they blocking you?" Yang Liang didn't answer. The leader jeered, "Oh, so this little lady has been avoiding us because she's shacked up with this rat." He stepped closer, reaching out his hand. Hugging Xiaodong, I recoiled and tried to run, but he grabbed my collar. Disgusted, I snapped, "Let go of me." The group roared with laughter. I thought it would end like before, with some harassment and nothing more. But no one expected what happened next. Amidst their laughter, a heavy metal ball smashed down. Blood spurted like a fountain. The leader didn't even have time to speak before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Seeing someone die, a few of the gang scattered in panic. 3 remained and lunged at Yang Liang. Yang Liang yelled at me, "Run." Dazed, I snapped out of it only when Xiaotong started wailing. Clutching him tightly, I mustered all my strength and ran. Behind me, agonized screams echoed. Fearing Yang Liang would be outnumbered, I planned to drop Xiaodong off at Yang Liang's mother's house and report to the police. But as soon as I arrived, Yang Liang was already there. He was rifling through the house for something. His mother stayed in the inner room sewing, muttering vile curses without lifting a finger. After rummaging around, Yang Liang grabbed Xiaodong and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Si Lai is dead. I have to take Xiaodong and leave. You should go home." Looking at Yang Liang, drenched in blood, I grabbed him back inside. "If you go out like this, you're basically announcing you're the killer." "I don't have a choice." "Come with me," I said. He hesitated, wary of implicating me. But I didn't care. I couldn't let him take Xiaodong away. Without the child, I wouldn't survive. I stripped off his bloody clothes and found him something clean to wear. Then I said, "We're leaving together." He looked at me in shock. "There's no time. Let's go," I urged. And so, the 3 of us embarked on a hurried, unprepared escape. We headed northwest, braving hunger and sleeping in the open, begging along the way. Before we knew it, a year had passed, and we found ourselves in Tibet. It was during this time that I learned why Si Lai had confronted Yang Liang because of Xiaodong. Yang Liang left. He dropped me, Xiantong, and his beloved bull at a mountainous area near the Sangon River. After he left, I immediately decided to turn back. It was the most resolute decision I made in the first half of my life. I didn't want Xiantong to endure a life of constant hiding and displacement any longer. I was also terrified something would happen to Yang Liang. But as soon as I set foot in Steel Mill Street, an elderly woman charged at me. She slapped me so hard I saw stars. Before I could react, I heard her yelling, "You vile whore. Your whole family is a pack of heartless scum. Your father killed my husband, and now you've sent my son to prison. Even if I have to stay here and rot, I'll drag you to hell with me." She grabbed my hair as she screamed. Xiantong stepped forward to shield me. Shaking off the dizziness, I recognized the woman, Yang Liang's mother. Ignoring her tirade, I grabbed her arm and demanded, "Yang Mama, did you just say that Yang Liang has been jailed? And that my father killed your husband?" In that moment, I desperately hoped I had misheard. The police confirmed it. "And you dare pretend you don't know? Oh, you're good at pretending, aren't you? Seducing my son into raising your bastard child. Now that the brat's all grown, you turn around and throw my boy in jail. Your filthy Shao family has sucked Steel Mill Street dry and even took a life. My poor husband, so honest all his life, was melted into molten steel." As she cursed, she alternated between clawing at my face and yanking my hair. For a moment, I stood there in shock before shoving her away, grabbing Xiantong, and running to the police station. When they heard I was Xiaoqua's daughter, they briefly summarized my father's crimes. Hearing them, I felt as though lightning had struck me. The news overwhelmed me, and I collapsed on the spot. When I woke up, night had fallen. Xiantong sat beside me, keeping watch. After much deliberation, I decided I had to see Yang Liang. Yang Liang was being held at a temporary detention facility. When he heard I had brought Xiantong back, he initially flew into a rage. But after calming down, we spoke briefly, and I shared my thoughts. Yang Liang, we should hand over Xiantong and let the police investigate. Xiao Hui, are you crazy? What have we been running from all these years? And now you want to hand over Xiantong? How do you think he'll cope? Do you want him to bear the label of being illegitimate for the rest of his life? Frustrated, I snapped back. Then what do you propose? Take the child and leave. Go as far as you can. What about you? I'll survive. He said this, turning to leave. I blurted out. Back then, you started collecting scraps to investigate your father's death, didn't you? Did you find out my father was involved? That he wasn't just guilty of corruption, but also of murder?
Who told you that?
I don't believe it. If he was truly a murderer, how did he die suddenly of illness only 6 months into his sentence? Don't you want to uncover the truth? Don't you want to know who really pushed your father into the furnace? Xiao Hui, my father is dead. Your father is dead. Neither of them is coming back. Please just do as I say. Take Xiantong and go far away. Never come back, all right? Why can't we hand over Xiantong? Despite my repeated questioning, Yang Liang remained adamant in his silence. Yang Liang was charged with intentional homicide and fleeing the scene after killing Xilai. I knew that if Xiantong could prove Xilai was hired to provoke Yang Liang, it could establish a case for self-defense. At worst, it would be considered excessive defense. After much thought, I decided to secretly take Xiantong for a DNA test. I wasn't completely unaware of what my father had done in the past. My mother had left me a letter, which I had kept hidden all these years, unwilling to face it. But now, for Yang Liang's sake, I decided to expose all of my father's crimes. In her letter, my mother mentioned someone who, despite having been transferred away from the steel mill, was still relentlessly searching for Xiantong. That person was Wu Qing, the former director of the steel mill. Director Wu had always longed for a son, but his wife couldn't bear children. Bound by the influence of her family, he dared not openly seek another way. So he approached my father. As part of their deal, my father would facilitate illicit approvals for Wu Qing's operations in exchange for helping him secretly father a child. This wasn't a particularly difficult task, until Wu Qing insisted that the mother of the child had to be a virgin. This condition made the search much harder. By chance, my father learned that an old man named Yang was arranging domestic work for a distant relative, a 16-year-old girl. It seemed like a stroke of luck. That girl became the key to securing Wu Qing's lucrative deals. At first, everything went smoothly. The girl, being from the countryside and naive, was easily deceived and soon became pregnant. But at 4 months along, Wu Qing's wife found out. She threatened to expose everything to the mill. Faced with an unmanageable situation, Wu Qing, ruthless as ever, bribed the girl to leave. But she refused to go. Even the normally docile old Yang refused to back down, threatening to take the matter to the workers' union. That night, the steel furnace malfunctioned, and the workers in the scrap department tragically fell in. Actually, it wasn't just one person who fell in that night. It was 2. No, 3. Because a 4-month-old fetus is also a life. My mother's letter ended with one final, haunting line. Wu Qing later found another girl. Her name was Yoju. Such wickedness. Yoju. After extensive inquiries, I discovered that she was a relative of Lu Xiaofeng. I specifically sought out Lu Xiaofeng's mother. To my surprise, the elderly woman had passed away several years ago. After many twists and turns, I finally tracked down one of the gang members who used to work under Xilai. With some money as motivation, he was willing to spill everything. It turned out that back when Lu Xiaofeng was running her salon, she wasn't just profiting from illegal sex work, she was also helping an official with a secret task, finding someone to have a child in secret. The girl's name was Yoju, a teenager at the time. The arrangement had already been made, but Lu Xiaofeng reneged on the deal midway. Not only did she demand more money, but she also insisted that the other party buy her a storefront. When the official refused, she secretly sent the child to the countryside. The official tried negotiating with her several times, but Lu Xiaofeng made increasingly exorbitant demands, claiming she had leverage against him. She declared that her conditions must be met. Faced with her blackmail, the official decided to protect his reputation at all costs. He instructed Si Lai to set fire to her salon. However, they never anticipated that Lu Xiaofeng had sewn a letter into the baby's swaddling clothes when she sent him to the countryside. The letter detailed the deaths in the steel furnace incident. That baby was Xiantong, and the deceased was none other than Yang Liang's father. As for how Lu Xiaofeng knew about it, she took that secret to her grave. When Xiantong was brought to Yang Liang, he originally didn't want to take the child in. But the old woman carrying the baby noticed his cold demeanor and quietly said, "The child's mother died, and our Xiaofeng only took him in out of compassion." Yoju was a distant relative of Lu Xiaofeng. After Lu Xiaofeng's death, Yoju committed suicide by jumping into a river. So, by the time Yang Liang sought me out, he already knew the truth. But for Xiantong's sake, he chose silence. Why was he so protective of this child? Could it be Yang Liang's past attachment to Lu Xiaofeng's salon wasn't because of Lu Xiaofeng, but because of Yoju? My wild conjectures startled me. But soon, the truth revealed itself. Yang Liang's mother told me that he had indeed once liked a girl. But later, he heard she became the mistress of a wealthy man. After being abandoned, she eventually died. Thus, Yang Liang wasn't repaying a debt to Lu Xiaofeng, he was protecting Yoju and her child. The last time I went to see Yang Liang, I told him I had already sent Xiantong away and that he was safe. As for Wu Qing, I handed my mother's letter over to the police. Along with it, I submitted the evidence Yang Liang had painstakingly gathered during his scrap collection days.